Hello, welcome to this week's video. My name's Rob Stewart from Rob Stewart Photography, and we're talking here about the figures that you enjoy painting. Now, we all do them. I love photography, but I love gaming, and I love painting the figures around as well. From 40K and lots of other things, I just love painting figurines. Of course, normally we have the basic ones for our armies. We paint lots of them, we put them through, put a bit of a base on the front, and that's all very well. But then you get a really good one, something that you really enjoy painting, something that's absolutely gone just spot on. Sometimes you put them on a small plinth like that, something with a bit of height on it to make it look good. But there are other days when you'd really just like to keep it, to display it. Now you can, as I've here, put them on a shelf. You can look after them. There are cases you can use as well. But the basis of that is having something to put them on. A base like this, perhaps a little bit bigger. Something you can add a little bit more to the narrative. Something perhaps that has a nice base on it. Something that could set a scene. Perhaps something like that. Then you can add figures onto that, perhaps one, maybe two, maybe three, depending on the size. And then we'll be able to take photographs. And that's one of the future videos that we're going to have, is to make one of these up, make something that looks really good, something that you can enjoy painting, and then photographing them and displaying them in a way that you would like, and displaying them in a way that you can show your friends. You can put onto media, put on there, and then show your skills as well. Now, it's a great hobby, photography and painting as well, and we can combine both of those, and we can enjoy doing that. So for this video, we're going to look at a base, something like that. We're going to look at what we can do to bring it to something around that sort of size and with that kind of detail on there. From that, we can then add on to figures, and from there we can take some photographs that could look really, really good. So let's have a look at the basis of painting a base, how we can embellish it, what sort of ways can we get it to make it look good, what effects can we have, and then we can really enjoy playing around and making bases. So we're going to use one of these type bases, decent size. It's going to be enough to get probably 2 or 3 figures on there in some kind of scenario. How we're going to do that is to glue pieces of plaster on there in the same way as we would have done with a small diorama like that, small vignette. Just put a few of those on. But we're going to plan roughly how we're going to do this. So what we want roughly is we want the eye to lead into here and probably put it roughly into thirds. What that will then enable us to do is to put some of the rocks in here, just along for the length, a main bit in here and another bit on the bottom. That gives us 3 bits. We're going to put that one in, another level in there, and we'll just get on with the good old white glue. Now we have in here several bits of plaster. Now what I've done with these is basically poured a flat piece on and just allowed it to dry and then break it. And that's all I do with it, just break pieces off until we get something that looks quite nice, something that looks appealing to you. It doesn't have to be too big. But what we can do is to put a piece on and then pile another, just to give it a bit of height. So you want to try and get, if you can, 2 levels. That would be nice, and it looks pleasing to the eye. Something like that would probably be about right. Another piece running in the side. I'm going to get a longer piece running in there. So let's just break off a little bit. Another long bit running down. And it does just lead the eye into this section here as well. So let's get on with a bit of white glue and put that on together. So there's nothing clever, just ordinary PVA glue that you would often find in any hobby store. Put a good dollop on here. And I can still move things around a bit because it's going to take a little while for it all to dry. Once we've got what looks appealing, what looks pleasing to you, we can fill that all in. It does get a little bit messy here and there. And pull that bit into the side and there, and then pull that one in on the top. And that will allow also the figurines to run through to see that they've gone somewhere, they're going somewhere. We'll fill them in later on. And perhaps, because that's a standing one, we're getting on there, perhaps commanding the troops as the troops move on through there. We'll see how we get on with that. Leave it to dry, and then we'll go through the next stage of building that. The next stage is going to be putting some texture on there. And what we'll do is we'll use one of these. This is an Armageddon dust. It's a really nice sandy one. It will give the texture and the feel of an arid desert. Perfect for that. And we'll fill that one all in together and add a bit of texture to it. So you can be quite generous with the amount that you put on here, and generally move it around so you get a feeling of texture on there. Make sure you don't get too much on the edges here. This can all be wiped off, but we want to make sure that that's not covered. So that will show up quite nice. Now you can add to that some texture. So if you're thinking that something like a water flow coming down through here, there's going to be some kind of water in the bottom. Now they will when you paint it. Of course, that will change as we go along. But I thought that would be quite a nice thing to do. You can make that almost like a dry riverbed going into there. And then a little bit more texture in there. And then we wait for it all to dry. Now you notice in there, I've also added a few little bits of, it's actually an old paintbrush where I've just taken bits off, and gradually I'm cutting bits off it. They will just look on there as a small damp patch, a little bit of reed or something else in there. We'll add some more small vegetation on, but I thought that was just a nice sort of way of starting that. So we'll leave this all to dry, and then we'll start looking at painting. So it's all dried, and you get a nice sense of the type of earth that's on there. And we've even put a little bit of vegetation on there that we've stuck inside. Now you notice then that there's quite a bit of rubble down in that bit, a bit of cleaning up to do. But it gives a sense of there being a kind of a water flow through here. And perhaps at the bottom, it can be slightly muddy just to show there's some damp around, just some water around. Now the easiest way of doing that is just to break it down, to wash it back with some acrylics. So here we go, it's all dried, all looking quite good. You get a nice bit of texture on there. You've got this piece of gravel coming through the middle there. Gives a sense of a feeling of water perhaps flowing down and through there. And there may even still be a little bit of dampness in there. You can see there's also, we've put in a little bit of reed in there. We're going to put some other vegetation in later on. So the way now to get all of this brightness down is to knock the colours back. Now you can buy the many kinds of paints that you've got, but to be honest, a little bit of this one is, I think this is burnt umber, just ordinary acrylic. You can buy that in any hobby store, nice and cheap. Tiny little bit, water it down, wash it over, and then we can start to build up the colours on the base here. So I've got a nice big acrylic brush, and all I'm going to do is to put a tiny amount. It doesn't really need to be a huge amount of acrylic paint in there, and then just water it down. And you can just do it gradually. You can put more or less of the colour in, but it's just a case of washing the colour down. And you see immediately that you do that, you start to see a change. Now you can change your colours at another time, and you will see at certain times some things will still move a little bit. And once you use it up, just add a little bit more. You don't want to put too much on there, just enough to be able to run a bit of water in. Otherwise, you've got to try and get rid of an awful lot of it. Bring it down, paint it all on. So that makes a nice difference. You can see there, just got to be able to dry off, but it changes completely the colour. Now, the one things we're going to do later on in here, we're going to use another one of these colours. This one will be a sand colour, and we can change those colours and move them around until we get the right effect that we want. So everything's nice and dry. It looks good. Now what we want to do is to make a lot of contrast between this to make it really show up. And we'll do that by dry brushing, which, if you've never done it before, is taking a brush, wiping off as much of the paint as you can until it's almost dry, literally, and then you brush the pigment on all and any edges that are on there. Some of this will fall off, Now that if you do it gently and you work along with it, let's work along dry brushing some of that all around that and on the side of the rocks, and we'll see what difference that it makes. So we put a bit of the sand onto that, and we want to rub this as much as you can off onto a piece of cloth. You can sometimes use a piece of wood, which sometimes has a better job of that because you don't get the fibres on there. But for now, we'll just use those. And you just gently rub against, and you build up a layer of colour. And you can see as you pick it up, gradually it will pick up the colours that you want on there to make it lighter, to make a contrast on there. Now you can build that up as much as you like. It's entirely up to you how much you want to put on there. But just keep on building the colour up until you're happy with the way you've started with that. You'll also find if you start building it up on the ground bit as well, it will also pick up more in there. You can see that it starts picking up some of the colour almost immediately on that. So we keep moving, keep picking it up until a level that you're happy with, and then we can move on from there. So everything's nice and dry. It looks good. Now what we want to do is to make a lot of contrast between this to make it really show up. And we'll do that by dry brushing, which, if you've never done it before, is taking a brush, wiping off as much of the paint as you can till it's almost dry, literally, and then you brush the pigment on all and any edges that are on there. Some of this will fall off. Now that if you do it gently and you work along with it, let's work along dry brushing some of that all around that and on the side of the rocks, and we'll see what difference that it makes. So while things are going at the moment, we're just going to knock down a little bit more colour, so it's a bit more contrast in this section here. And we'll use a bit of the Agrax Earthshade, nice and easy one to use. All you got to do is pick it up and put a bit on, and you find that it will change the colours considerably. You can water it down a little bit and just let it run into the rest as well. Just allows you to put a little bit more colour in there. We did say this would be a fairly muddy bit, so let's put a bit of Agrax Earthshade into this corner section here and in there. So we'll leave that to dry, and then we'll carry on adding a bit of that sand and just running back this section just to get a little bit more contrast in. So the next you can add into there to put some contrast, in particular, just so we're looking here to be a fairly damp part, is to make some contrast by adding weathering powders, very, very fine powders, as you do have there, and quite simply put it where you want it. Now you know if you're going to blow it around it's going to move around quite a bit, but you can do that. You can move it into a patch and you can notice the changes in the aspects as you bring them on. Be careful when you want to get rid of it because it can make a huge difference, and if you sneeze or something like that it gets all over the place. So be careful when you're using it. You see then there is a difference in the now. This dark earth has changed it quite a bit. You can move it around, and when you do damp it down, you will notice it will darken off as well. So how do we do that? Well, the easiest way of doing it that I've found is get some airbrush cleaner into one of these small pipettes and just clean it off. And once that all dries off, you will find, surprisingly, that will pick up that. And of course also you need to get rid of what you've got in there as well. So there you go. We'll leave that all to dry off completely. You can move it around a bit and move them fairly quickly and damp them off where you don't think you want them completely. But we'll start with that, bring in some mud, some muddy effects into there, bring it right up to the edge so that it will work all the way around. Otherwise you're just going to be left with some patches that are just going to show off. You want to keep a nice contrast, you want it to flow in and be part of the whole scenario. And again, you can dampen off some of these parts, make them change, and then at another time, again, you can dry brush this until you've got the huge amount of contrast that you want in there. So the base is pretty much done there as far as colouring is concerned. We've got a nice contrast in there with the highlights. You can get a good colour in there, and we can just add some greens and bits and pieces in there. So next thing we're going to do is just to add in a little bit of green in a couple of patches, just so it looks like there is a bit of vegetation knocking about there, maybe just in here. Then as we look down here, we can just add a little bit into that side. And the final thing we're going to do for this is to use a couple of these. Now out of these are some bits of vegetation, and we just want to dip them in, a bit of white glue, dip them down where we think they might be suitable to put them. Somewhere like that perhaps. Another one in there. We'll kind of jam it in where you might expect some vegetation just to grow. And they'll put 2 or 3 of them in there. Just dip a bit of white glue into it, and that will just sit in there. A couple of the darker ones, they'll look alright in there. Of course, you can buy lots and lots of different colours, some really dry ones if you want them as well. They'll all look pretty good. Now the last thing we're going to do for this set is just take some of this, dip a little bit in some of the patches where there's a bit of green, just for a bit of variance, and just tap off any excess. That really has covered a decent size, a decent amount of base on there. So here we go. Base completed, and some bit of texture on there, some vegetation on there just to add to it as well. Possibly could be a little bit three-dimensional. Well, that's personal choice. And certainly the next time we can look at adding on some new dimensions and some other things of interest in there. But it gives you a basic start to basing up for large ones for dioramas. So thank you for watching. Thank you for liking and subscribing. Let's hope you do that. And we'll see you next time. You take care. We'll see you soon.